Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to another episode of Ding and the quiz is done. So let's get started with our Today in History. It is the 24th of March for me today. It's Tuesday and our Today in History is the anniversary of the death of Queen Elizabeth I, who died after ruling England for 44 years. So, next step then is our Do Now quiz. I've had a look at the data from the first Do Now quiz and used that to inform the questions that I'm going to ask in this one. The only piece of advice and guidance that I want to give everybody is, in fact, two pieces of advice. Number one, it's not okay to put a question mark. It's not okay to leave things blank. It's exactly the same as a normal Do Now quiz. If you take a guess and you get it wrong, that's going to give me more information about whether you're close or whether you're way off and how much I need to help you than a question mark or a blank space ever will. And the second thing, keep an eye on your spelling. Quite a lot of people got correct answers, but it would have come up as incorrect because you spelt it ever so slightly incorrectly. So, pause the video now, do your Do Now quiz. Okay, the aim of today then is to answer this question. Explain the importance of William's preparations for the Battle of Hastings in 1066. This is the second exam question you'll be asked in your Normans paper. So we're going to have a look at why William chose to invade, recap on that, look at how he prepared for battle, and then look at how we can answer this question. So, first things first, why William chose to invade. This is largely the stuff that we covered last lesson. William believed that he should be King of England. He had a post-obedient claim from Edward the Confessor. He allegedly had this promise from Harold Godwinson to defend his claim to the throne. He had a close relationship with William, and he had a dynastic connection to William as well. So he's in a pretty good position, and on the 6th of January 1066, one day after Edward the Confessor died, Harold Godwinson crowned himself king. This was extremely unusual for Anglo-Saxon kings. Normally there would be a few months to prepare the coronation, all of that process before the actual crowning. And the fact that Harold chooses to do this as quickly as humanly possible suggests to us that he was aware of quite how many challenges there were to his throne. So, as soon as William hears this news, he realises he's not going to be able to take the throne peacefully. He decides to invade. And his preparations for invasion have several steps to them. I'm going to outline them on the board, on the PowerPoint, and then I'm going to give you some time to complete the reading, which kind of puts the meat on the bones. So, England up here, Normandy as part of France here. So one of William's first steps is to begin gathering troops. He's got troops from Normandy, but he also has troops from Flanders, from his father-in-law, and he's able to get troops from Brittany as he'd recently defeated them in battle. At this time, what he also did was send an abbot called L'Enfant to Italy in order to get the Pope's permission. The Pope does give William permission, and gives William the papal banner, essentially a flag demonstrating that the Pope supported this invasion. So William has threatened, begged, offered rewards from as many people as possible, gathered an army, got the Pope's approval, and he gathers his troops at a place called Dives-sur-Mer, and he's then forced to move his troops to an area called Valery-sur-Somme. Goes into more detail on that in the reading. This actually turns out to be a massive advantage for William because it is slightly closer to the English coast. And when William and his army travel across the English Channel, they land at Pevensey, which at the time would have been on the coast. In the modern day, it's about a mile inland. And when they get to Pevensey, one of the first things that William does is he reinforces the Roman fort with one of the flat-pack castles he's brought with them, and then he sets his troops to work raiding the area nearby for food and supplies. So that's the summary, but that is not enough. What I now need you to do is to go through the reading, read the keywords first, take it slowly, and then come back and we'll talk about how to answer the importance question. So pause the video now and do the reading. Okay, so you should have done the reading. Now we're going to have a look at answering this question. And when we talk about an importance question in history, there are two things which are really, really important for gaining those top marks. Firstly, you need to know what the word importance means. And when we talk about importance, we're talking about consequences, things that happened as a result of other things, which is our cogs here. And our higher level answers also need to be able to establish links between different events. So it's all about describing, or explaining, I should say, consequences. It's all about our links and our chains of reasoning. So at the back of your sheet, or on the other side of your sheet, let's flip over onto the visualizer. There we go. We've got a spider diagram at the bottom. How did William prepare for the Battle of Hastings? So, bearing in mind what I've just said about this idea of consequences, I want you to have a little look at the reading again, and then I want you to plot out different ways in which William prepared for his invasion. Okay, so pause the video, fill in the spider diagram. Okay, so you now should have plotted out your spider diagram. I think we can probably take the PowerPoint off for the minute, and let's go through our answers. So there are a variety of different answers that you can give here. What's really important is that we're also starting to think about the big ideas, the big principles that lie behind each one of William's decisions, because if we don't, we run the risk of just creating a list, and that's not going to get as many marks. So, answers that we should have. In fact, I'm going to be awful here, and I'm going to Blue Peter it and do a here's one I made earlier. So, is there a logical point to start? Let's start up in the top right hand corner, of course. That's a logical place to start, apparently. So, gathering troops, supplies and ships from other magnates. This is largely due to the idea of having a large enough force. William ultimately knows very little about the battle that he's going to end up fighting with Harold Godwinson, or indeed if he's going to end up fighting a battle with Harold Godwinson. So he needs to make sure that he has the largest force possible to ensure against any large army from Harold. So that also links in with our next one, gathering horses and soldiers. Now, it's all well and good having a large army, but if that army is either exhausted or is unwilling to fight, then the chances are you're not going to have a very effective army. And this is what a couple of our other areas are about. So, getting the papal banner from the Pope. If troops believe that they are fighting a holy war, they are fighting for God, they are much more willing to fight for longer and to fight harder and to do things that they wouldn't necessarily have done otherwise. So this is about morale and stamina. Which links in with keeping our morale of our troops. Oh, we have that wonderful quotation. I can't remember where it is in the writing, but there's that fantastic quotation or section where William exhumed the body of a saint and paraded it in front of his men at Villeray-sur-Somme in order to bring up their morale, because that's clearly how you motivate people. So, same principle here. I mean, it says it right there. You need to have a big enough force, but that force also needs to have the stamina in order to be able to keep fighting. I would argue that this one here, moving his troops closer to England, although this was arguably an accident, it does still have a great advantage. Do we have the map available? That's the question. Bear with me for 1 second. Let's just go back to the map quickly, and then we can go There we go. So, moving his troops closer to the English coast, especially with the bad weather, reduces the risk of losing them. So this is arguably to do with William having a big enough force, or the largest force possible with which to fight Harold. Right, let's go back to the visualizer. There we go. So this is about having a large enough force. We've already spoken about that one. And then we have this strengthening his foothold at Pevensey and at Hastings, because he reinforces the Roman fort at Pevensey and then I believe reinforces the fort at Hastings as well. I would argue that this is both morale and stamina and having a large enough force by having an easily defensible position in which William could keep his troops, because the area around Pevensey Castle, essentially you've got the castle in the corner and then you've got this huge bailey which is surrounded by a Roman wall. I dragged Mr. Spooner there on holiday last year. He thought we were just going to Brighton. Turns out it was a history trip, as always. But this huge wall is going to give William's troops somewhere safe to stay in case they were attacked. So it allows him to have the biggest force possible, but when he's in this area, he also encourages his troops to raid the surrounding villages. That's going to be minor victories for them, which is going to raise their morale, but it's also going to mean that William has troops that are really, really well fed and really well rested, and that becomes a huge advantage later on when we get to the battle. And when we look at Harold's 1066, we'll see why that was such a wise decision on William's part. So what we now need to do is go back to, there we go, we need to go back to this question, the importance of William's preparations for the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And before I get you to answer the question, we're going to have a look at a couple of model answers. So let's move this over here. We're going to start with this one. William's preparations for the Battle of Hastings were important because he equipped himself with cavalry and had flat-bottomed boats so that he could transport the cavalry and the flat-packed castles across the Channel. He also made sure that his cavalry had a lot of morale because they had the Pope's support. What I'd like you to do now, you don't have a copy of this model, but either on your sheet or in your yellow book, I'd like you to pause the video and then write down what you think are either the strengths or areas for improvement in this model. Okay, so there are definitely some strengths here. The biggest strength is that all of this history is absolutely correct. In fact, I've suddenly realised why I bothered printing this out, so that I could mark it. So let's flip back to the visualizer, which is that. So there's loads of correct history here. Equipped himself with cavalry, flat-bottom boats so he could transport the cavalry, beginning of a chain of reasoning there, flat-packed castles, and morale from the Pope. So we do have a lot of correct history here, but what we also have is a list. So many of these points could easily be expanded out into individual paragraphs, which then would have allowed this student to have much better chains of reasoning. And instead, we've got a list in paragraph form, which isn't going to get a huge number of marks. Another one of the weaknesses is that they've said why something was important, but they haven't really explained why it was actually important. They've just jumped into giving examples. This is what a lot of you were doing with your usefulness questions in medicine. Rather than starting with big principles like challenging traditional authority, you were starting with the example, like bloodletting. And bloodletting isn't important on it or useful on its own, it's the principle that it demonstrates. So the two areas that this person could do to improve is turning these into individual paragraphs or examples within individual paragraphs, and making sure that they're starting off with overall principles rather than examples. Okay, we're going to switch back to the Word document. I now want you to do the exact same thing, strengths and areas of improvement, but for this paragraph, and then we'll go through it together. So pause the video, make your notes. Okay, so funnily enough, this is the stronger paragraph. And before you say it, it is not the stronger paragraph because it's longer. It's the stronger paragraph because it's better quality. We need to look at why it's better quality. Well, look at that. It's almost like I prepared. So, William's preparations for the Battle of Hastings were important because they ensured that his army had more stamina than Harold Godwinson's army. That is the big principle, the big idea which this paragraph is going to discuss. This is why what I'm going to talk about, what the student is going to talk about, is so important. William chose to land his troops on the south coast of England in the earldom of Wessex, where he then ordered his troops to raid the nearby settlements. There's my knowledge. It's short, it's sharp, and it's not knowledge vomit. The effect of this decision was twofold. As William's army did not have to travel far and had access to food, they were well fed and well rested before the Battle of Hastings began, causing them to be able to fight for longer. Secondly, as Wessex was Harold Godwinson's personal earldom, it is likely that this decision would have been a factor in Harold rushing south after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, limiting the reinforcements he would have been able to gather and causing some of his army to be exhausted before the battle had even begun. Now, if we were to look at a structure of this paragraph as a diagram, you've got the overall principle first of all. That is then supported by some knowledge, or a fact, and that then splits off into two branches of explanation. And I'm not going to write explanation again because I can't be bothered, so we're just going to do that. So the first effect was that William's army had more stamina. The second effect was that Harold's army was arguably smaller and had less stamina. And I've explained each one separately. Do not worry if you didn't get this one, or you didn't think of this reason. You won't have. You will get it when we do the next lesson, but obviously I have the advantage of having taught this many times before. What's important is the structure that I've used. So I've said, here's the principle, here's what you did, here's why this meant that William's army would have had more stamina. It's also really important, and we're going to use one of my new highlighters because I got a pack of 12 in today and I want to take advantage of them. Let's go purple. Completely superfluous using this highlighter, but I haven't had a legitimate excuse so far, so I'm going to. This phrase here, causing them to be able to fight for longer, it's really important that I've used that. I've referred to stamina at the top, and this is the meaning of stamina, being able to do something for longer. So what I'm demonstrating to the examiner by paraphrasing or defining stamina rather than just repeating it is that I know what that phrase actually means and I know why it's important. So overall principle, fact to support it, and then a chain of reasoning. You do not need to do two branches like I've done. I've just done two branches because they were there. So what you now need to do is you need to write one other paragraph of your own, which should take you 5 minutes. Please time yourself. That paragraph cannot be about, highlighter, cannot be about William choosing to land his troops in Wessex, because that's what I've done, and this is not an exercise in how well you can copy my work. Once you've written it, take a photo of it, or you can put it on a word processor and then email it to me. The more pieces of work I get back, the better feedback I'm going to be able to give. So 5 minutes, time yourself, pause the video, write your answer. Okay, so make sure you get that email to me or your history teacher if I don't normally teach you for history, and let's finish off today with our bits to take forward. So we go to that one, there we go. So If you want to revise this topic a bit further, it's section 4 in your knowledge organiser in your quiz booklet. If you want to read further, I've linked an article exploring the Bayeux Tapestry, which is a really, really important source for this period of history and the story we're looking at the moment. And if you want to watch further, I said it's going to be the same video as last time. I think I am going to change that, but this one was particularly tricky to find. So watch this space. If not, I'll put the same link on there. Okay, thank you very much, and I will see you later.